Good morning and a very warm welcome to today's event called Navigating ESG Legislation, What Implications for Carbon Removal Projects in Europe. My name is Ana Gumbau, I'm a climate and energy journalist and moderator, and I'll be delighted to be moderating today's discussion organized by Euractiv and supported by Life Terra. As the need to accelerate decarbonization becomes an imperative, companies are looking to assess the risks and impacts on people and the environment, and at the same time investors are looking for more information on what makes the most sustainable companies. But the need for transparency, as well as robust methodologies and ratings, is crucial to prevent greenwashing and misleading information on a company's products. So to address those inconsistencies and to address these issues, the Commission has proposed a package of measures to improve transparency and integrity of ESG rating activities. So today we'll be talking about ESG legislation and its implications in particular for the carbon removal projects across Europe. We have a great lineup of speakers joining us today. We're going to be starting by introducing them right now. So we have with us the Policy Officer for Corporate Reporting, Audit and Credit Rating Agencies at the European Commission's DG FISMA, Ines Romer. Welcome.
Welcome. Good morning, Anna.
Good morning. We have with us as well the Member of the European Parliament and part of the Econ Committee, Rasmus Andresen. Welcome. Also with us is the Head of Environmental Transparency at ECOS, Mathilde Crépy. Welcome.
Thank you.
Also with us is the Managing Director for Climate Partner Impact, Robin Stoffers. Welcome.
Good morning. Hello.
Good morning. Next up with us is Europe Forest Manager at One Tree Planted, Marika Lujati. And last but not least, we have with us the Project Manager and Carbon Removals Coordinator at Life Terra Foundation, Marcos López Ercilla. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone.
Just to remind everyone before starting the conversation that you're going to have the opportunity to ask questions to our panelists, and we have, as always, Slido prepared for you. So you can join either by scanning the QR code or use the hashtag ESG on slido.com. Either scanning the QR code or use the hashtag ESG on slido.com. We have an hour and a half of discussion, so we're going to have plenty of time to answer your questions, so make sure to keep them coming. All right, let's get the conversation started. And don't forget, by the way, to tweet with using the hashtag EADebates. So I would like to start with you, with Ines Romer. So from the European Commission side, could you provide us an overview of how the EU's ESG reporting framework is helping companies to better integrate sustainability into their reporting processes? What can you tell us about that?
Thank you, Anna. So maybe first a small disclaimer. So I work in the unit in DG FISMA that is responsible both for corporate sustainability reporting and also ESG ratings. Unfortunately, my colleague responsible for ESG ratings cannot be with us this morning. So I will cover ESG reporting only. So I work in the small team that is responsible for the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive and the European Sustainability Reporting Standards that, as you may know already, were adopted last year on 31st July and are all about accountability and transparency for companies relating to sustainability information. So with this legislation, we have put sustainability reporting on an equal footing with financial reporting, and we have definitely put ourselves as front runners in terms of sustainability reporting on the global on a global scale. So the legal mandate is contained in the CSRD that was published in December 2022. We had a transposition deadline for all member states to incorporate the directive into their legal systems on 6th July this year. So just over 2 months ago, and this directive and the related delegated act are vital tools for companies to look deeper at their business model and also to have science-based methodological data collection to inform their strategies and also their impacts, their risks, their opportunities related to sustainability, and all this with the idea that growth needs to be more sustainable. So you've said it in your introduction, investors, they need reliable and accurate data to make their decision, whether to invest, where to invest, when to invest. And these standards provide exactly that, to have capital flows go where they're most needed and where they can have the most positive impact. So the ESRS have also, I think it's worth mentioning, 12 standards covering the full range of sustainability issues, with the environmental standards, including climate, the social standards, and also the business and conduct standards. And we think in this way we really have the full spectrum of sustainability and also human capital issues covered. And we'll have, of course, the first wave of reporting companies reporting already for this financial year in 2025. So this is for the ESG legislation from the side of ESG reporting.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Ines, for providing us with this overview on indeed the current framework and the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive and the ESRS as well. And indeed, as you mentioned, we were meant to also be joined today by your colleague Magojata Feruch, but unfortunately she wasn't able to join us in the end and cover the ESG ratings reporting. But still, I mean, yeah, we're in good hands in today's panel discussion. Now, I'd like to move to a member of the European Parliament, Rasmus Andresen, because related to that, how important it is then to have more transparency and more integrity in ESG rating activities, and especially in the growing market and the context of a growing market for carbon credits as we are seeing it now.
Well, first of all, thanks for organizing this event, which I think takes place in a very crucial time. We all know this, that like we are at the beginning of the procedures when it comes to the hearings of the new commissioners, and I think that like after we all took some important steps in the past mandate when it comes to the sustainable finance agenda, now it's time to go even deeper and to ensure that the sustainable finance agenda in general will be important in this mandate for the new commission and the parliament as well. And of course, everything related to ESG is a part of this. I think we did some important steps in the past mandate on the reporting. The colleague from the Commission already mentioned it. I worked mostly in the Econ Committee also on the ESG ratings, where we also succeeded by coming up with a framework, the first framework regulating ESG ratings, where I think important steps to improve transparency, also when it comes to the rating side, got decided, and now it's about the implementation, of course. But what I also think is important, and there will be a revision clause in 2 years' time, like for many of the other legislation as well. This mandate will have the possibility to have a closer look on what actually worked and what we should develop further. I think we not just need to talk about transparency, but we also need to talk about standards and standardization. And there, I think European legislation is still reluctant to deal with this, and there had also been a lot of struggles agreeing on something in this direction. But I think if we really want to ensure that the instruments are good in quality as well, then it's about transparency, of course, and we need to have a closer look on the implementation, but we also need to talk about standardization. We need to talk about the scope, for example, of the legislation, but we also need to have a look, for example, on third country providers, where we know that there are still different requirements which are not compatible with what we what we decided or regulated for the European level. So I think that those are the most important parts. And then I would like to add, when it comes to the implementation side, that we also need to strengthen European institutions to ensure that implementation will be good and greenwashing will not take place. And this is addressed, for example, to different European institutions dealing with financial regulations, like, for example, the EBA or like some of the others, the ESMA and so on. Because if we don't have strong institutions who can ensure both the monitoring and the implementation, then I think we will have problems at the end. So I'm looking forward to the discussions on some of the elements with all of you in the next 90 minutes.
Thank you very much to Rasmus Andresen. I'd like to pick up on one of the points that you mentioned, which is standardization. And that makes a very nice segue to our next speaker, because ECOS works mainly on standards. So I'd like to welcome Mathilde Crépy and ask you, what role then does transparency play in making sure that carbon removal projects, or even carbon credits more broadly speaking, are effective in achieving real environmental outcomes? And how do you think this can be strengthened?
Thank you, Anna, and good morning, everyone. So I think transparency is critical in two respects. So firstly, transparency is critical in bringing more clarity on the actual impact of carbon crediting projects. So really in assessing the quality of carbon crediting projects. I think everybody has probably seen, investigations showing, or even maybe read scientific literature that has shown significant quality issues with carbon crediting programs. And these include the fact that very often or too often those programs do not ensure additional impact. So typically when it comes to carbon crediting programs, additional greenhouse gas emissions reductions, so that, this reduction would have happened anyways, and the project would have happened anyway. For example, like the building of a wind farm, or the prevention of a forest being cut, it would have happened anyway. So there is no additionality. There is also the difficulty of setting meaningful baselines when it comes to comparing what is the actual impact that has been achieved compared to the initial baseline. Potential leakages or rebound effects, and this is the case typically, for example, where forest fires occur in a plot where carbon credits have been generated. So, the fact that the carbon removal is reversed or not permanent. And obviously also some reports of social or environmental harms, whereby, the projects have not really looked at, more broadly speaking, the impact on communities, or ensuring that the rights of indigenous people would be protected. So transparency in assessing the quality of these projects is absolutely paramount to make sure that reputational risks are also, mitigated, both on the investors or the people financing these projects, maybe, and also maybe potentially the people rating the quality of these projects, and then more importantly, actually, transparency is also critical when it comes to the use of those credits. And basically what we advocate for is a complete disaggregation from the use of these credits, between the use of these credits and the actual impact of, the companies or the investors investing into these projects. So ensuring that, their, environmental footprint, or, let's say the ESG rating methodology will basically consider these as two completely different things. Because we believe that sustainable finance policy should be about making sure that the impact is created where it has the most effect. And to us, this is in channeling investment through projects that respect the mitigation hierarchy. So, deep and immediate emissions reductions first, or a reduction of impact first, that will really enable the market to reconsider how things are being produced, and the business models. And, only then, when we have achieved deep and immediate impact reductions, then only we can maybe think about additional what else could we be doing, typically those projects.
Thank you very much, Mathilde. Now I'd like to bring Robin Stoffers to the discussion. From your perspective and from your experience, how are corporations already integrating credits around nature-based solutions into their environmental strategies? Do you see a demand growing? The perspective of a project developer, what can you tell us about that?
Thank you very much, and also hello to the group. I think it was very interesting also to hear what Ines and Rasmus and Mathilde already said on transparency, bringing now in the project developer view a little bit more. We think it's a very, very good development on what the EU is doing on the reporting, on the ESG reporting, because it's really moving the importance of that reporting and ESG on the same level as what Ines said on the financial reporting. So this is really good development. What we see currently from a project development view is really that the companies are still in a waiting position, I must say. They want to do something, and we see that over the last couple of years, right? The corporates, they want to do something. They want to invest into nature-based solutions or other reduction activities, but also they really try to navigate through new frameworks. They don't know what to do, what is the right thing. Also what Mathilde said about the criticism and reports about international projects especially, there's a lot of insecurity on the corporate side, on the investor side, on what is the right thing to do. And therefore, we really see, and this is not only speaking me from a project developer view, because Climate Partner is also working with almost 6,000 clients in Europe. So we see this whole CSRD topic pretty much live, evolving, and what are the challenges in those companies and corporates on how to deal with that, because many companies, the threshold is not too high when companies actually have to do a CSRD reporting, following the standards. And many don't have the resources or the knowledge really to navigate through it. This is really what we see coming up, and also, or what is happening already today. But this also means that they are so busy in navigating through those topics that they kind of wait to invest into nature-based solutions and doing impact, especially beyond their value chain. I don't say this is a bad thing, because it means they concentrate really on the reporting and reduction in their value chain, which is like kind of super, super important. But it also hinders currently investment into other beyond value chain mitigation activities. But also what we see is that transparency is getting a really, really big topic. And it was always a big topic, right? It's like only the expectations and the guidelines, they changed. And like the awareness of what transparency and quality means is changing. And from a project developer view, it means also we need very, very clear guideline on what is expected. All the projects can be designed in a way that they are super transparent. We can report on all the KPIs, right? It's like kind of, it's really managing expectations and setting really clear guidelines from EU level, for example, how those projects need to look like. And also regarding additionality, what Mathilde said is like super important. What is additional, kind of because there are many. It's not black and white often, right? It's like there are many gray tones in between. And especially this will be a challenge in Europe because we have so many subsidies in Europe, especially in the farming and forestry sector, that additionality is really a very, very important topic to look at. And maybe last point on the reporting, what we also, of course, see, and which is also logical, the obligation to report is not yet an obligation to really act beyond the value chain. That means only because we have this reporting framework, which is a very good sign, it doesn't mean that companies necessarily invest now already into nature-based solutions.
Thank you very much, Robin. I think it's a very interesting perspective to understand the company's struggles and challenges, and also emphasizing indeed the need for transparency. We're going to be talking about the credibility, of course, of the market, because it's been really a pressing issue. We've seen many investigations on carbon credit markets, etc. So we're going to be talking about it in more detail in the discussion. I'd like now to bring Marika Lujati to the discussion from One Tree Planted. Could you talk to us a little bit about what are the challenges of implementing reforestation projects, specifically in Europe?
Sure. Thank you so much, and good morning again, everyone. So before I jump in, just a little disclaimer. So as a nonprofit organization, and specifically in Europe, right now we don't do certified or carbon removal projects, at least not yet. However, the on-the-ground challenges that we are experiencing for many of the reforestation projects that we manage are very similar, if not exactly the same, for carbon projects as well. So I would say probably that the first challenge is undoubtedly the most pressing challenge, which is climate change. And it's probably also the reason why we're all here together in the same room discussing about these important topics. So from extreme weather events like droughts or wildfires, flooding or windstorms, these events are becoming more and more frequent and intense, which can complicate extremely operations on the ground in order to establish and maintain healthy forests. Additionally, we are experiencing a shift in the climate zones. So some tree species may no longer be suitable for certain regions, which requires a careful species selections in advance and adaptation strategies on the way. I would also highlight that there is another critical issue, especially in Europe, which is land availability or land fragmentation. So because of agriculture, urban development, infrastructure building, basically they're all competing for land, which can leave a limited space for reforestation and restoration. And again, this is particularly true and challenging in highly densely populated areas like in Europe and some cities or nearby cities in Europe. And especially if we consider the scale of these projects. So if you consider large-scale reforestation or restoration, I would say that in a case that really matters. And much related to land, so it's not just the fact that we don't really have a lot of land available in many places, but it's also the soil quality, which creates another critical issues on the ground. This is the result of our history and centuries of extensive agricultural practices, industrial activities, pollution. All of these elements, they have degraded soils in many different parts of the world and in Europe specifically, which makes it challenges for trees to establish, to thrive. I could go on forever with the on-ground challenges because that constitutes basically a great part of my day-to-day operations in managing large-scale reforestation projects in Europe. But there is another challenge that I think is a crucial factor, which is funding and governance. I would say these two. Reforestation or restoration initiatives, they require, of course, long-term financial commitments because they are long-term processes and projects. We also need to ensure that there is effective management. So coordinating efforts across multiple locations within the same country can be very complex and time consuming. So I'll let you imagine how complex that can be if we consider different countries and different regions and coordinating efforts across all these different environments and ecosystems. I'd also like to say that there is always a bright side of the story. And again, collaboration is key. So we need to ensure that we take into account the perspective of all stakeholders involved, from governments, NGOs, local communities. Cooperation, again, is essential in order if we want to overcome these challenges and ensure that the long-term sustainability of these projects. So if we start tackling climate change challenges, if we develop sustainable land management practices, and of course, if we can secure long-term funding, then we can definitely increase the success, the credibility, but also the resiliency of these reforestation projects.
Thank you very much, Marika. And then last but not least, I would like to bring in the perspective, another perspective on the ground, so to say, and bring to the discussion Marcos Lopez. We've just seen that there's quite a broad European framework when it comes to improving the transparency of reporting activities for companies and whatnot. So for companies trying to bring carbon credits into their environmental strategies, what role do you think that this legislation will play in supporting the role, the growth of carbon and biodiversity credits?
Yes, thank you, Anna, and thanks to the other panelists. I have to say that my view on the ground is very similar to the one we just heard from One Tree Planted. And in terms of companies and the role of these carbon credits and other type of nature positive credits that might come along the way, such as biodiversity credits or water and soil credits, which are also highly important to start valuing and to start promoting. What we can see is something that Robin also anticipated, is that these companies, they want to do something, but they don't really know where to invest. A lot of these strategies that they have are not really clear as of today, and there's many methodologies, many standards, many type of different credits in the voluntary market, for instance, that are not yet accessible because they are not well known. And it is true that carbon markets are imperfect as of today, but they are one of the main sources of funding for many of the ecological restoration projects around Europe. And I'm talking about proper ecological restoration, such as agroforestry, syntropic and regenerative agriculture, and not necessarily monocultures. I'm talking about projects that really provide additionality. And the truth is that there's a lot of organizations, a lot of people who are doing a great job, and that right now could do way more and in a much bigger scale and in many more countries if they just would have access to this funding. But the companies are still uncertain about it. A lot of it has to do indeed with the transparency. We've seen a lot of controversy, especially sometimes around the global south, because these projects are more difficult to follow up. They're more difficult to have a proper reporting. But when we're talking about projects in Europe, I believe that transparency should be easier, because a lot of the companies that are based in Europe and want to invest in Europe have a higher chance of knowing better these projects. Also, institutions are or tend to be stronger in these European countries. And it would be highly important not only to increase the transparency and the easiness to report these projects, but also to push in some way or another these companies to invest in European projects, in projects based within the boundaries of their actions. For instance, in Mexico right now, this is already happening. The Mexican government is forcing by law the Mexican companies to invest in ecological restoration projects based in Mexico. In this sense, they are a bit ahead of us because this will allow companies in that country to invest in hyper-local projects and to very well know what their actions are and what their ecological return or sustainability return will be. And also, it will be easier for them to promote this in their CSR strategies. And as of today, what we see on the ground is that indeed in Europe, companies still prefer to invest in projects elsewhere, also because of the price. But let's be reminded that planting trees is difficult everywhere, and doing ecological restoration projects is difficult everywhere, but it is way more expensive in Europe, and therefore we need also uh, a better source to funding and a more secure source to funding. And in this sense, if companies and organizations, NGOs, are always depending on grants and calls in order to promote this implementation work, this is not a secure source of funding. And for companies to better know what is happening within Europe through a better communication, through better transparency, and through the acceptance of European standards in the voluntary market, would be highly valuable for project developers in Europe.
Thank you very much, Marcos. Indeed, so there's, as mentioned, the need of transparency and really the need to understand really how to navigate like all the different methodologies. I would maybe like to follow up on a couple of questions, maybe starting with indeed how this legislation and how the European framework can really support all different stakeholders. And maybe I would like to bring back first Robin Stoffers and ask you then, how do you think then this ESG reporting framework and the EU legislation that is aimed at corporate sustainability reporting will impact or is already impacting project developers? Do you think that it will help boost the demand for nature-based solution credits? What are your thoughts on that?
I really think it can. I think we're not there yet, and this is really like also what Marcus now said. Companies really don't know what to do currently, and we have so many different standards. Like we have the big international standards, we have like kind of national standards in Spain or in France or the UK, for example. And this is really what will be kind of eligible and accountable for like kind of, if you have a net zero target, for example, will the EU have different standards, different methodologies on how those projects will be calculated and reported on? So all of those things we also see now first VCS projects, the big international standard coming up in Europe. No one knows, shall I invest into that project? Will that be like kind of recognized under the carbon removal and carbon farming framework and so on? So I think it can has a huge impact if we do it right and if we work together to really have this guidelines and guidance on transparency, but also what kind will be methodologies from an international level be included and are eligible on the EU level as well. And I think, like I said, the impact can be huge and it can really channel a lot of finance into those projects in Europe, but also abroad. But I think we are not there yet. I think we still need to do a lot of groundwork in really achieving confidence and trust and knowledge by the investors and the companies to really open their wallets and invest into those important projects in Europe.
Thank you very much, Robin. And just to remind everyone in the audience that you can ask questions to our panelists using Slido, using either the QR code on the screen or using the hashtag ESG on slido.com. Ines Romer from the European Commission will have to leave us in 20 minutes. So if you want to ask any question to her, the time is now. For the remaining speakers, we're going to have a little bit more time for discussion. So then in that case, I would like to maybe bring back Ines, and I would like to hear your thoughts on what we've been hearing so far. We've been talking about like all sorts of different methodologies. I'm wondering if then all the legislation and the reporting framework that has been put forward by the European Commission aims to help companies navigate such a complex environment. And especially, I'd like to understand more about the European Sustainability Reporting Standards and how is it facilitating more accurate greenhouse gas emissions reporting. If you could dive more specifically into it.
So yeah, I would like to react on many points, but I'll just maybe stick to the most important elements. So, and then I'll talk about GHG reporting under ESRS. So, to react to what Robin was just saying, so that right now you have so many standards that you need more than guidelines, that there is still work to be done to achieve trust, to kind of get there. I think this is exactly the aim of our legislation, and it's we're still before the first cycle of reporting, so we're still at the very beginning of this journey. And the aim of our framework on ESG reporting is exactly to harmonize the reporting framework, to avoid having all sorts of different questionnaires that are costly, fragmented, where one client requests one type of questionnaire to a company and then the other one requests another. One investor asks this type of question based on this methodology and another one on another. And so our framework will really harmonize. We think it, in the longer run, it will also allow to decrease the cost relating to replying to this questionnaire, because you will have kind of one template, if I may say so, also internationally. So we have our European standards, but we have not been working alone in silo. We have achieved a very, very high degree of alignment with the ISSB standards, with the GRI standards. We're constantly talking also to other jurisdictions in Southeast Asia. We're talking also to the UK, so to make sure that our companies that also operate outside of EU borders will not have to do double reporting. I also think that our framework will allow the EU to have the highest quality data on sustainability information. We'll have information that is comparable. Right now, how do you compare an apple and a pear, right? Now we will have the tools to exactly compare a company with another. And this will be further reinforced in a few years' time when we will also have the sector standards, because this will reinforce comparability within one sector and among peers. Also, a very important element that very often we tend to forget is that all the information reported will be audited. And this is the ultimate guarantee that the information, you can trust it, you can build confidence around what is published. And to maybe react on a couple of things that have been said about these carbon projects. So I'm no expert in these carbon projects, but definitely in ESRS, we wanted to avoid all these double counting and kind of false claims, because, for example, in the ESRS, carbon offsets cannot be merged with emission reductions. And although the ESRS is not behavioral, we, I would say, encourage, because we foresee reporting around nature-based solutions in our under GHG reporting, such as reforestation projects. So that's for our, I think, very robust and promising framework that is yet to be fully developed. Maybe just a word on GHG reporting. So of course, under ESRS, you have to report on scope 1, 2, 3. Scope 3 are very often the largest source of emission for many companies. And your scope 1 to 3 emissions have to be quantified in metric tons of CO2 equivalent. We have different ways of measuring this the GHG emissions of a company, and we notably have the notion of GHG emission intensity, and this metric will help stakeholders assess how efficiently the company generates the revenue relative to its carbon emissions, for example. You also need to always explain the frameworks and the methodology that you use to calculate your removals and offsets. And this ensures transparency, reliability of the claims that are made, and this needs to be, again, verified.
Thank you, Ines. We need
yes,
to move to
maybe
the next
I will
question.
stop. Yes, sorry.
I'll get back to you shortly. Thanks a lot, Ines. And I would like to bring back to the discussion Rasmus Andresen. based on what we've been discussing around all the different methodologies and how companies sometimes are lost in all of this information, how do you think that the regulation for transparency and integrity of ESG rating activities can support that and harmonize to an extent this framework?
Well, I think that this is like a bit of the other side of what I already mentioned, that a lot of things happened in the past years, right? And I mean, like having strong European legislation means in a perfect world that we have a common framework at the European level, which is helping also companies to have clarity. But as it stands right now, and there I fully agree, for example, with Robin, we are not there yet. First of all, because legislation ended up being quite complicated with a lot of loopholes and maybe unclarity, but also because there are different standards and elements in different parts of legislation. This is why I think that for this mandate, it will be crucial to streamline the different proposals and have a closer look in the implementation on where we can see that things are not working as they should. So I think that streamlining besides of like coming up with some stronger standards will be the crucial point for the next years to come, so that we can ensure that the legislation actually is also working on the ground. So I think that those elements are, from my perspective, the most important right now, because it doesn't make sense to have a lot of great legislations not working because they are not fitting together. And I think there is a challenge also for the next Commission to ensure that this is not the case.
Thank you very much, Rasmus Andresen. Now, talking about the legislative framework, I would like to hear the thoughts from Mathilde in terms of how do you think all the legislation, let's say, aligns together, and do you see really coherence with all the different pieces of legislation, the regulation for ESG rating activities, CSRD, the ESRS? How do all these pieces of the puzzle fit together?
Thank you, Anna. So indeed, I think when it comes to, for example, greenhouse gas emissions accounting and reporting, some of these legislation are already, picking things from each other to make sure that they align together. So typically about the use of credit, and I think Ines already mentioned it, but the ESRS, they state that, for example, these, the carbon credits or offsets, they cannot be merged with actual emissions reductions in corporate targets. They cannot be, part of the so the emissions reductions target of a company within their transition plans, for example. And actually, the EU taxonomy, for instance, did not allow that within one single activity you would reduce your impact using carbon crediting projects, or you would offset part of your emission from a high emission activity. So typically, if you think about the generation of electricity or heat, you would not be able to meet the 100 gram of CO2 per kilowatt hour threshold using carbon credits or offsets. So basically, there are already some in some ways, the EU sustainable finance legislative framework is already pretty much, integrated and abides by the same principle. Beyond also this sustainable finance framework, I think it is also important to refer to the Green Claims Directive, for instance, which is currently in the making. And for which there is a big debate around what companies can claim for marketing purposes or towards their consumers. So this is still an open discussion as to whether to what extent they can rely on these, for example, carbon crediting projects to to claim carbon neutrality, for instance. Is this allowed? Is it not allowed? So we know that at product level, for example, it is not allowed, but at company level, the discussion is still open, and we would like for communication towards investors is as aligned as communication towards consumers, so that basically, the green claims legislation typically follows the same rule as the ESRS when it comes to reporting greenhouse gas emissions. So yeah, very important, I think, also to provide some clarity as to, what companies can claim and so on, and provide them with the clarity that they need to make the right type of claim without having any issues of facing potential litigation issues or reputational issues. I think it's really, really important to align all of these frameworks together, even beyond just sustainable finance legislation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Mathilde. Since Ines will have to leave us in a few minutes, I'd like to then start picking up a few questions from Slido. A lot of them are focusing on the voluntary carbon markets and carbon credits and carbon removal specifically, which I'm not sure if it's so much your remit, but let's see how many of the questions can we answer. There is a first one that says that as of now, the ESRS framework leaves still room for assumptions. For instance, assessing materiality for e-topics, the LEAP methodology or other, and also different auditors have different interpretations. So how will you address this?
So thanks, Anna. Indeed, I wouldn't be the expert for carbon projects questions. I think we work very closely with EFRAG. You might be familiar with this private body, which is basically our technical advisor for the contents of the ESRS. But to reply to the question about the ESRS leaving room for assumption and auditors having different interpretations. So I think it's a very difficult question in the sense that we will have some assurance standards that will guarantee the very high quality of the assurance provided on the sustainability statements. I unfortunately cannot dive into too much detail on this issue because it's a colleague who's 100% dedicated to the assurance standards and to the assurance part. But you have to understand that an auditor will have to sign off on a sustainability statement. So it has its liability at stake, its responsibility at stake. So I think auditor will take this very seriously, of course, without knowing what the reports of other companies and other audit firms will look like. It will be a learning journey in the first years. So our advice, I think, as Commission for now is, we understand it's a learning curve. There is no obligation to over implement the standards, but just to embark on that journey, and hopefully with the first reporting cycles, we'll have a better understanding how things work, where are the difficulties. And let's keep in mind that, as the MEP was saying, indeed, in the next years, it will be about implementations, see how things work in real life, potentially also looking again at the standards, see how we can improve them. So very much of a learning curve in the beginning, where we hope also to support companies in this journey.
Thank you very much, Ines. There was a second question addressed to either you or Mathilde. I think it's more on the carbon carbon credit certification, which certification methods or protocols will be expected to be approved by the EU beyond Verra or gold standard. This given the typical small size of plots in Europe, which makes traditional standards too expensive to apply. I don't know if maybe Mathilde might be better positioned to answer this question on the kind of protocols that can be approved by the EU.
And so happy to try, and then I'm pretty sure that in the rest of the panelists, I'm quite sure that some of them would also have an answer. So I think this relates more to the carbon removal and carbon farming framework. So my understanding is that the EU is actually trying to develop their own quality assessment criteria for carbon removal projects. Which I think is a good thing. It will most probably build on existing standards and existing methodologies, but I don't think that it should per se look at only solely recognize voluntary carbon markets standards. I think it should really build on all of the knowledge gathered from this from carbon removal projects over the year to make sure that we set the right quality assessment criteria and quality processes. So hopefully, the EU is creating its own standards and ensuring just that it's not necessarily only recognizing other types of standards with which we have seen some quality assurance issues.
Thank you very much, Mathilde. Anyone else would want to jump into this question? You can raise the hand and I'll give you the floor. Marcos, please.
Yes, thank you. I think this is a key question indeed for Europe, because it is very precise to say that indeed in Europe the land fragmentation is big. There's a lot of small landowners, small plots of land, and this means that there's also a lot of different landowners. This makes it very difficult for indeed reporting. It has to be very standardized, because if everyone is sending different information, then it becomes chaos for in between, and therefore the information provided about all the projects happening in these plots becomes messy, and transparency is reduced, and the traceability of the information is reduced. And in this sense, it is highly important that this information and that companies and investors know about smaller sized projects, because it is true that if you're working within a project of, let's say, 50 hectares or even less, 10 hectares of ecological restoration, they have the same right to achieve funding for their land, the projects, their management through carbon removal credits than a 20,000 hectare project. But if the costs are as high as, for example, some of the biggest standards require, this is never going to happen. And the truth is that with this, we will be missing on a lot of potential ecological restoration in more fragmented plots. So the need to understand these smaller standards and that cover different grounds and that have different methodologies is highly important. It is indeed very, very difficult, as Ines was saying. Also, let's remember that the scientific methodologies behind these standards are continuously evolving, and also the taxonomy of what we understand of carbon removal, of carbon offset, of carbon avoidance, of nature positive credits, ecosystem payment. All of this is continuously evolving, and project developers and landowners and also companies have to report carefully on it, and they have to, in a way, every year do their homework to understand how to better report this, because there's different names for everything, and it becomes highly complicated. Yes.
Thank you very much, Marcos. Well, I'm afraid that before I give the floor back to Robin, I think Ines will have to leave us now. So just wanted to thank her very much for joining us in this discussion.
Thank you very much. Have a nice conversation.
Thanks a lot for being with us. And now, Robin, I think, wanted to take the floor.
Marcus said is very important. I think what we need to achieve to also make like smaller projects possible is really like kind of the regulations. Of course, high quality and high transparency focus needs to be there, but it should, from a cost side, but also from a complexity, it should be maybe reduced for smaller projects, or in the end, it should be quite an efficient system. What the EU is building up, that actually also small projects can be included, because this is a common issue in Europe, of course, right? It's like we have a lot of small areas. Or what we also see in on the international level, of course, is that we have like grouped projects which are set up, which can like combine a lot of smaller projects or smaller project instances, which are like kind of all similar and can be put under one frame. And I think this also helps very much to gather smaller projects and channel also investments into smaller activities, which normally would maybe not have access to financing. And yeah, I think it's really very crucial also to, if the EU is developing standards and methodologies, that there is also a very good transition, an early communicated transition of projects which already may be implemented today, and they have the quality assurances. They should be able to transform into other standards and methodologies, and that should be made quite efficient, I would say. Otherwise, we will see now everybody will be super in a waiting position, not investing into current robust methodologies, maybe, because we don't know if those methodologies will be recognized under the EU framework. Because, like I said, we are seeing developments under national standards or VCS already in Europe, but corporates are reluctant to invest because they say, what will happen on the EU level and can that be integrated? And this is like, I know I'm always very impatient on those things, and I'm really a big fan of what the EU is doing. But it goes really in the right direction. But on the other side, it's also really the case. We have now the highest emissions, and we need to act now, and we are hindering corporates a little bit on taking right decisions because we all just don't know what's the right path.
Thank you very much, Robin. I would maybe like to bring back to the discussion, Marika, because we just mentioned the need for robust methodologies, and I'm wondering, I'd be very curious to hear from you, how do you think then that robust monitoring, reporting and verification practices for reforestation projects can help boost the credibility of these markets?
Yeah, thank you so much, Anna. I think that's crucial. That's a key part in the process. So, like, it is clear, as Marcos was saying, but also Robin and the other panelists, that this market, the carbon credit or carbon removal markets or biodiversity markets, they are evolving at a very fast pace. So we're just started the journey, as Ines was saying also, but it seems clear that a credible carbon market requires a multifaceted approach, which combines a variety of elements from strong governance, from most importantly, stakeholder engagement, also commitment to innovation and technology to tackle all these challenges that we can experience on the ground. All these are essential elements if we wanted to increase the integrity, the transparency, the accountability of the market. And I believe that robust MRV practices, monitoring, reporting, and verification practices will also be the key in this process. So not only because it is thanks to robust, reliable, and standardized MRV practices that we can increase transparency and accountability behind these projects that are implemented on the ground. But we also need to implement clear methodologies, standardized methodologies for measuring, for reporting, for verifying these emission reductions. we also need to include like an independent or third-party verification, which can go parallel to the verification that is done in-house, because this is going to ensure the accuracy and the integrity of the claims that are made by businesses and corporations. So public transparency, let's say, is key. And if we make these methodologies and these data analysis publicly available, we can definitely increase the trust in the market too. So not only like strong governance on one side, so clear regulations, a robust oversight, because as Ines was saying, we need to make sure that this market doesn't have fraudulent practices, that the market operates ethically. But more importantly, we need also to engage with stakeholders. So this is probably crucial for building trust in all the markets, and specifically a market that is evolving at such a fast pace like the carbon market or biodiversity markets. These markets, they need to be responsive to diverse needs. So we need to seek input from governments, from businesses, local NGOs, the communities on the ground, but also the civil society in broader terms, because it's only by addressing their concerns, if we incorporate their perspectives. Marcos was mentioning small landowners spread across Europe. So if we take into account their perspectives, we can create a more inclusive and effective, efficient market. And of course, when it comes to MRV, let's say that a very logical reasoning behind that is that we need to invest in innovation and development. So we need to adopt the new technologies. We need to learn from experience. So in this way, we can improve the credibility of the market and the market itself, but also address and adapt to emerging opportunities and challenges. So this is going to give relevance to the market in the long term.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Marika. I have a question for Rasmus Andresen, because as the regulation for ESG rating activities continues through the adoption process, I'd like to hear from you what the next steps are, and like also how are the different stakeholders reacting to the proposed challenges, and what the legislation aims to achieve.
Well, I mean, I think that now there will be a strong focus on implementation, and I think also a lot of the statements made by the colleagues, like in the last minutes, I think are also like things we need to have in mind and taken into account when it comes to the implementation, because I still see like a big split between like harmonizing at European level and a lot of diversity in the market, and also a kind of fragmentation when it comes to this. And as I understand the political majorities here in the House, but also in the Council, my feeling is that it will be tough to get really new legislation implemented. But on the other side, as I also mentioned in my introductory statement, there are revision clauses in a lot of legislation agreed, who are basically saying that in 2 years' time, 2-3 years' time, we will have a closer look on the legislation, on the current legislation. And there I think we have a window of opportunity, even also for strengthening some of the parts where we may see some problems coming up and where we would like to see more clarity.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rasmus. I would like to then maybe come back later to a little bit, the future of the sustainable finance agenda. But then there's another question that I wanted to ask a bit more specifically on the market for carbon credits, because I mean, what we're going to see most likely, or at least this is what I wanted to hear your thoughts on, is that we're going to be seeing a demand rise, and this is going to boost prices. So I'd be curious to hear from Marcos, where do you see this going in terms of demand and in terms of pricing as well? Which impact do you think that is going to have on pricing, specifically for carbon removal projects? So can you tell us about that?
Yes, that seems indeed to be the trend. In the last years, there's been a decrease in the prices of the carbon removal credits. Because there's been a decrease in the credibility of a lot of the processes involved and a lot of the projects. And it has been shown that many of the projects that are that were that had a difficulty of traceability were indeed not providing additionality. And it seems like we've learned from this, and the companies have learned about this, and also the public institutions. And there is now a promotion, let's say, for a higher quality type of credits. Of course, every standard is free to set the quality of their own credits within their own criteria. But this is going to be the norm, probably. In this sense, the price of the credits will likely rise indeed, which, in my opinion, will benefit the European market specifically. There's always going to be companies that are going to want to combine their to offset their emissions with high quality credits, and maybe not necessarily lower quality credits, but cheaper credits on third countries, simply because this is just cheaper. But for the European market, there is an opportunity here, because, as I was saying before, doing an ecological restoration project or reforestation project in Europe is way more expensive than doing it in the global south. The materials are more expensive, the labor costs are more expensive, and therefore the credits also need to be more expensive because it needs to cover for these previous costs. We'll have to see until what extent they rise, how this affects the market, and how companies accept or not these new prices. But as in many other fields, it is easy to understand that high quality projects should be paid with higher prices in order to cover for the real job that people are actually doing on the field.
Thank you. I think Mathilde wanted to have a say.
Yes, very quickly, just to bring back a bit the price discussion and maybe like the financing discussion on the climate. The financing on climate transition. So at the moment, basically the size of the market of the voluntary carbon credit market is around $2 billion per year. While we know that the climate investment gap that we would need annually to comply with the Paris Agreement would be in the region of globally 6 trillion per year. So the magnitude of the financing that is needed is enormous. And at the moment, voluntary carbon markets is very it's not much, let's say. Let's put it this way. So I think indeed, while we can potentially explore this avenue beyond value chain mitigation, I think we also need to focus on other types of financing mechanisms that can really make sure that the amount of money that is needed for the climate transition is indeed channeled. So that's the first thing. With relations to the price, so at the moment, the cheapest carbon credits on the market, they are around $4, $5, $6 per ton of CO2. While scientific literature has also tried to price put a social price on carbon. And basically, it would be in the region of $130, $150 per ton. So there is this huge gap between what the market sells you as, ultra cheap carbon credits, which also, give really a full sense of, how carbon, how the climate transition can sort of easily be achieved, or how your emissions can easily be compensated for, and indeed I think giving a strong price signal, so raising the price to the extent that it actually needs to be in terms of to cover all of these sort of the externalities is really, really paramount to ensure high quality carbon credits and high quality carbon removal projects.
Thanks, Mathilde. I'll give the floor to Robin and then back to Marcus.
Yeah, maybe also on what Mathilde said, I totally agree that prices need to increase, but we also see, especially in the international context, yes, maybe $5-6 is what is too low for really high quality projects. I would not say that it's always the case, because every project, every country is different, right? If you have higher salaries in country, of course the prices the costs per credit are higher. But we also need to take care to put artificial high price on the credit when it's not needed, right? And that's why this quality topic, what is high quality? Is high quality if the community gets $20 per credit? Does that mean high quality? It doesn't mean that the MRV of the project or the robustness of the accounting of the emission reduction is higher or not higher, right? So I think everybody is like also interpreting the topic of high quality a little bit different. And we also need to take care that we don't raise prices into ranges where like companies are not willing to pay it anymore because they cannot maybe do it from economic standpoints. And this is like, I think, a very fine line on what does a good project need to be developed, and what is actually also where companies are willing to do an impact. And yes, social costs of carbon are much, much higher what credits normally cost. But I also have my doubts that companies really invest that whole amount into carbon credits. But I think it also doesn't have to be. It should be the budget, what they also use for reduction activities internally, right? And this is like the big topic on beyond value chain mitigation. For example, if you set an internal carbon price, what is the split, right? What can you invest beyond value chain mitigation, and what can you invest into own reduction activities? So I think pricing is very crucial and will help to boost the market, but it's also a difficult topic because it's still it needs to be economic viable for many corporates.
Thank you very much, Robin. I'd like to maybe give the floor first to Rasmus and then go back to Marcos. Thank you.
Yes, no, I just want to come in on this because I fully agree on that pricing. Carbon pricing in general is a very complicated topic, and we can see this in the political debate in a lot of European countries, right, in the past years, and also because there is a social consequence. And yes, for sure, we need to work on carbon pricing, but I think that politically it will be quite complicated to achieve some steps which would be good for the climate when it comes to this. And this is also basically because of the social consequences and some of the political dynamics we can see in a lot of countries. So this is why I think that from a political perspective, we need to ensure that each step we are doing when it comes to carbon pricing needs to be addressed with social policy on the other side, which means that we are facing a different kind of debate when it comes to financing the green transition, because my feeling is that the money we can get out of the carbon pricing elements, besides of the arguments or additionally to the arguments you already mentioned, will not be the money we can use for the green transition, because we have the social consequences as well, and they need to be addressed, because if they are getting worse, we will not be able to deal with the green transition at all, because the society will not follow, and we will get outcome we may dislike, and where we will not have a functioning European Union any longer. So this is why I think we need to address this. But as one of the colleagues already also mentioned, as one instrument out of a mixture of different instruments. Otherwise, I think we will fail.
Indeed, thank you very much. And now, Marcos.
Yes, thank you. Just a small remark to not run out of time. But just to mention that we can also expect, or we should expect and push for carbon credits and the carbon market to include different types of nature positive credits within it. So in order to save the gap of prices and funding, and also to connect the direct price of a particular credit to the quality of the credit, in the future it would be interesting to bundle some of these carbon credits. I know these are different markets, but we are likely to see a transition towards this modeling where carbon is mixed with biodiversity, with water, with soil, and with different aspects, such as some of the carbon credits today are mixed with social values. We need to widen the perspective of what is nature positive. And this doesn't mean that carbon is not highly important, but we need to transition to a more holistic perspective in this sense, which might benefit the market as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Marika, I would like to hear your thoughts, especially when we've been talking about the social impact of for instance, reforestation projects, or when we've been talking about like high quality credits. I'd like to hear from you. Which co-benefits can or should such projects bring to local communities, and how to ensure that these projects then bring additional benefits beyond simply offsetting or removing emissions?
Yeah, thank you so much, Anna. And I believe that Marcos nailed it down, even if it's been very, very quick. But he mentioned that a holistic approach is essential when we design, implement, and develop these projects on the ground. So reforestation is not, and in this specific case, reforestation is not just about trees. So it's about creating thriving ecosystems. So by restoring habitats, we can protect biodiversity, we can enhance ecosystem services like water filtration, soil erosion control, and of course, all these benefits, they have a great impact both on nature and local communities. So beyond environmental benefits, which are of course essential, reforestation can have also significant economic impacts. For example, we mentioned the creation of jobs, but also the creation of local capacity, local knowledge, which ultimately fosters a sense of ownership among the local communities, and this ensures long-term sustainability of these projects. So it is essential, it is crucial to involve local communities from the outset, because again, it's only by understanding their needs, their priorities, that we can tailor projects to deliver tangible benefits to these communities, but also integrate their traditional knowledge, their traditional practices into our efforts. So we need to involve local communities from start to end. This means from the designing phase of the process until the implementation, the development, and the monitoring phases of the project itself. So we need to ensure not just that they are involved, that they are an active actor, but that the benefits that are created out of these projects are shared equitably among all the parties involved, which of course includes local communities. And again, the way that we can ensure that these projects can actively bring these co-benefits is through monitoring and evaluation. Of course, we need to build trust among the stakeholders, but then monitoring is an essential part of all projects or reforestation projects on the ground. So without monitoring, we can't really track the project's impact. So we can understand if we need areas for improvement. It's via these MRV practices that we can ensure that projects are on track to achieve their goals, their expected goals. And also, thanks to monitoring, we can also adapt our management practices to adjust to our strategies as needed, because challenges will be more and more frequent, more and more intense. So I'd say that overall, it's a long-term process, as I said at the beginning, a long-term commitment. These are essential because these projects are a long-term investment. So if we made a sustained commitment, we can ensure that these projects can deliver their full potential at all levels and among all the stakeholders involved, and that they continue to benefit local communities.
Thank you, Marika. And now I'd like to give the floor to Robin. I'd like to hear your thoughts as well on how do we get to generate such credit value.
I think like this holistic approach is very important, right? Because as long as we look at a ton for ton approach, for example, it will always kind of for many companies, and this is just normal that companies think like that, it will always be a race to the bottom. How can I achieve my requirements with the less money as possible, right? Of course, it can be high quality, but it will always be kind of saying, how do I get to my goal with the less costs? For that, there are already other approaches in the market. For example, setting a budget for like a money per ton approach. I set a budget in accordance to the emissions I have. And that means I can invest in super high quality holistic project. It doesn't matter so much on how much carbon I sequester in that project. But it's also a very nice approach because suddenly it's not relevant on how much money I spend per ton, but I have a budget which I can spend on a biodiversity project or on a water project or everything combined, right? We see a lot of nice projects in Spain, for example, on water source restoration. You cannot quantify that purely in carbon, but it's super valuable. And if you have like kind of rather a budget instead of a pure ton approach, it can be a huge impact also on projects beside of carbon. This is maybe also an approach which should be recognized, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. We only have a few minutes to go, so I would like to pose what could possibly be a bit the final question of today's discussion, which is, if we are looking forward, we have a new European Commission about to take office. We just had a new European Parliament also taking office fairly, quite recently. So in terms of the agenda moving forward, I'm curious to hear from all of you what still are the improvements or additional measures that are still necessary in the EU's sustainability and corporate reporting framework to ensure then that companies are held accountable for their environmental impact and support the credibility of these projects. Maybe I'd like to start with you again, Rasmus. Where do you think also the sustainable finance agenda is going in the next term? What do you think are still perhaps some missing elements?
Well, I think there is a lot still to do. As I said before, I think that when it comes to harmonizing some of the legislation we dealt with in the past mandate, this will be key. I think also not just when it comes to what I started out by saying, when it comes to the rating side, for example, also defining standards for ESG and not just like ensuring transparency will be key, because at the end, as we I think all agree on, transparency is key, and I think the groundwork for going further, but we should not stop there, and like defining standards also on what does ESG actually mean on content, on quality. That I think will be key. And then I think also streamlining the monitoring and also the possibility for European institutions also to sanction, for example, if there is fraud or misuse. I think will also be something we need to look a little bit more into on aspects like greenwashing, which I think will be the case in the next years as well. So this is what I think needs to be done. And then there are of course also other elements, but I think I will stop here, and I'm really looking forward also working on this in this mandate. And I would also like to ask all of you, if you have some input to us in the European Parliament, please reach out to me, both with our lovely panelists and experts here, but also when it comes to the audience, because I think there are also a lot of experts in the audience, and this is really a common task, and we need to work on this together. And I think there are more and more voices who are not interested in this agenda, but it's an important agenda, and we should go to the next steps in the coming years.
Thank you very much to Rasmus Andresen. Now, Mathilde Crépy, what are perhaps your final thoughts, or what are perhaps some still missing pieces into the robustness of such a legislative framework?
Well, missing pieces, I don't know, but my plea to EU policymakers, at least, would be to make sure that we don't forget about, like within value chain mitigation action, and that the sustainable finance policy also, like prioritizes those investment that will make that will ensure a deep and immediate impact reduction within companies' value chains before encouraging beyond value chain mitigation.
Thank you very much, Mathilde. Robin, some final reflections from you. What would be your plea then to the European policymakers?
I think maybe two things. On the one side, I really ask everyone to work together and that we have a cooperative approach on finding kind of the future of the market, because result-based financing has worked in the past, no matter on negative reports what have popped up in the last years. But it's a good mechanism and it works, and it was shown. And I think we just need to work together to really also see that those new regulations work on the ground. And I know that will take some time, but we need to have that input on what can we tell corporates, that we are very close in that process, and that also the EU is recognizing what actually is doable in the market, and on the project side, but also on the corporate side. And I would really like to have this cooperative exchange to shape that market, because I think we all have the same interest, and it's really needed. But we should really set competition or whatever aside and really work together to shape the market, because this will be the only way to restore trust in voluntary carbon markets and also bring back clients and investments into those projects.
Thank you very much, Ruben. Marika, some final reflections from you based on today's discussion.
Yeah, and thank you. And it starts mainly from these points that have just been raised. So what do we need to do next? I would say that, on top of clear guidance and standardized frameworks that is understandable by all the parties involved, and especially from potential investors and companies, but also on the ground project developers or implementers or manager. On top of that, I think that we also need to strengthen enforcement mechanisms at the European Union level. So this is, to reconnect to what Rasmus was saying, this can probably deter greenwashing claims or ensure compliance with reporting requirements. We need also to again, extend the scope of accountability. So we need to include a holistic approach in the process. So we need to cover a wide range of environmental and social issues. So biodiversity loss on one side, but also human rights and human potential on the other. Again, I will never be tired of this, but we need to enhance data transparency, standardization again, and innovation potentially, and also to tackle all the challenges that they were going to face more frequently. And Robin, again, said it very well, but collaboration is key. So we need to have an increased stakeholder involvement. We need cooperation at the cross-border level, transnational level, but also at the international level. So we need to collaborate jointly in this massive effort for the years to come.
Thank you, Marika. And finally, Marcos, what's one takeaway from today's discussion that you bring with you?
Yes, thanks. I think that in the last 3 minutes, most of the, if not all the most important matters have been covered by the panelists. I would just like to add that in the whole process of making this possible, we should remember to try to make it accessible for everyone, remembering that Europe has a very particular land use composition and land use historical change and the access to it, and that we need to make everything that has been said today and that will be formulated in the future accessible both for public institutions, for NGOs, for private landowners, and for everyone who is making an effort in climate change mitigation, so that no one is left behind and we can all work together to a more sustainable future.
Thank you very much. So with this message of working together, I think we can wrap up today's discussion. We talked about many topics, but I think there were some key words that came out constantly: the need for transparency, the need for standardization, the need for robust methodologies, both when it comes to ESG reporting activities, but also on how we certify carbon removals. It seems that these agendas are going quite in parallel, but there's a lot of connections between them. So I would like to thank our speakers for having joined us today: Ines, who already left us, but also to Rasmus, Mathilde, Robin, Marika, and Marcos, for what's been a great discussion. Thanks for the many of you who have joined us this morning at these Euractiv debates. You can continue the discussion using the hashtag EA debates, as you see in front of you, and see you at our next events. Thank you very much also to LifeTerra for having supported us in today's discussion.